Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Soccer for Us. This is Bart, and we were going to answer a lot of your questions about the state of U.S. soccer, kind of the big picture stuff. And then we have some big news happen this week that we absolutely need to talk about. U.S. Soccer has hired a new sporting director. His name is Matt Crocker. He comes to us from the club Southampton in England. He is Welsh by nature. And we just have a lot of kind of thoughts to get out about it and more just kind of tamper expectations, but also build up the fact that this means that we're a fully functioning federation again. And to talk about that is a man who, has a very hot take on Matt Crocker, like I'm sure all of you do. So it is US Keeper on Twitter, Thomas in real life. Thomas, your hot takes about Matt Crocker, right?
Oh yeah, they're extremely hot. I mean, he was always he was my number one choice for this from the beginning. So no, it's some interesting stuff. It's good. I'm glad it's I'm glad it's been signed and sealed, and now we can continue moving forward with this cycle for both the men and the women, because it's a critical position.
Yeah.
For the growth and development of of the youth and for the national teams.
And I think you kind of hit it. It's a critical position, but it is critical in the sense of them operating functionally. This is not truly going to change how the teams play as a whole. I think people think that the sporting director, especially at the federation level, like instills the style of play, which is just not going to happen in the US anyway, because there's always going to be people with different styles. But this just allows, especially the US women who have a World Cup in a couple months, it allows them to basically operate at full capacity now.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the piece there that's key. I mean, we right before we can talk about the gaps before, when you're when you're looking at, again, like a dual national, for an example, like who's leading that conversation. And so obviously someone like Crocker, that's a role they would kind of begin to have those conversations a little bit, right? Kind of set the tone, and then obviously your manager along the way kind of follows up with that piece of it. And without a manager, that wasn't happening, and without a director like Baldwin, like who's doing the conversation. So
Right.
so you need to fill these gaps very quickly, I think, especially when you have critical players that you could add to your to your player pool of that quality.
Yeah, and I think that is, again, the point of having a sporting director, is to give direction of the programs, not necessarily how they're going to play, but just help make sure they're all going in a similar and fluid direction, not having to piecemeal everything together. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of the takes we got. I listened to obviously the press conference today, the introductory press conference, and it's kind of my thoughts on things that he said that stuck out. But Thomas, I know before we get into that, we have even more hot takes to give about the Continental Classico. So if you'll indulge me about 5 minutes of talking about this cash grab friendly. We did kind of preview it last week. We did talk about the roster. Is there anything you actually have a hard and fast opinion about after this friendly?
My thought is if you're going to have these, again, primary domestic friendlies, if they're going to be versus Mexico, fine. I'll watch them. I'll support the team. But let's kind of set a standard of what you're trying to do with this. I mean, when you look at we saw, and I think between 10 and 13 or 14 players called into this camp that played and started. Many of them did. Like what's your expectation? Like, what are you thinking for players like Aaron Long? I mean, what's the goal for this? Because I think it really kind of missed the mark a little bit. They blended some young players in with some aging veterans. Really, I mean, Sean Johnson. I mean, do I really need to see him again? Like, I mean, over and over. It's I understand you're coming off a World Cup, so you want to bring in players that were at the World Cup probably a little bit to do that sort of thing. But like, set the expectation of what the goal of this is going to be for the national team, because I think that's kind of important to what to what moving forward, do you have to have that goal? Because these are opportunities where you can get a look at players that you might not see it very often, especially domestically, where or I think you want to make sure you can utilize those opportunities because they may not find their way to the national team, in the traditional ways, this cycle. It's gonna be an interesting cycle to see how they manage it. So I think they have to be pretty clear on what that expectation is.
Yeah, I think you and I were both pretty positive on this friendly happening, right? For just two reasons. One, obviously, yes, it's a cash grab, but the Federation needs money. We just hired a sporting director who I'm sure was not particularly cheap. It's also, as we talked about, a good way to get people into camp and just associated with the program. But as you alluded to, when it is a primarily domestic roster, which these are always going to be, it does kind of it doesn't make sense to me anyway to continue to bring back people who won't play a role in this next cycle. And I know there's no qualifying, but like past June in the CONCACAF Nations League, it really does need to be a turn the page moment. It probably should have happened already, but like, you know, Sean Johnson was probably going to go to the Nations League final, whatever. Walker Zimmerman's going. Like guys like that are going to go. But it was a missed opportunity to find players who could have just been new eyes to see them and possibly affect the team in a different way. The one I'm specifically thinking of that I keep going back to is Keaton Parks. I don't know what Kellen Acosta did in this match that told me that he has either A, improved or even B, declined as a player. Jackson Ewell gets a call up, doesn't do anything, like doesn't play. What's the point there? Glad Aiden Morris got a run out, but I mean, that was a missed opportunity. So while I think you and I are both happy that this is going to be a thing, apparently, because as you said, you're happy to watch more soccer. We would like to have some sort of goal of team progression. I don't think that was met with this friendly.
Yeah, it really was, and Keaton Parks is a great example of what it's a player that has been pretty consistent for he's only 25 years old, but
right.
like why I just don't know where he's missed, where that gets missed along the way. I mean, we've had enough domestic camps, in the last cycle, and even we had two already this year.
I know.
Like where's the disconnect with him not being involved? And I just and I just wonder if again, you can maybe give a pass to Hudson because he's probably got a smaller framework of players he's looking at that have currently been there than really younger ones. And again, Parks at this point in his career, he kind of falls into a bridge category where you could get something out of him this cycle if you bring him in,
right.
And he may find a role. And you're right. He's on my depth chart. He's making my my top four 42 45 team player depth chart at this point, just based on what he's done. But I just don't know why he's not finding that piece of opportunity to play for them. It is crazy.
Yeah, and I mean that's just the one I keep going back to, but there are others. But there are also some that get called in, right? We talked about Aiden Morris. This is his second camp in a row. That's great. Or second domestic camp in a row, I should say. That's great. Cade Cowell is a guy who clearly is going to be a part of the national team in the future, obviously going to be a part of the U20s. But then you look at a guy like Caleb Wiley who gets his chance, even though they weren't, even though he didn't play. Josh Widener is another one where, hey, that's a positive to bring him in and just get him associated with the camp, get him associated with what it means to be an international level player. So that in that sense, you're going to need veterans, right? And I get it. My sweeping generalization, the one that I'm just going to hold on to, is Aaron Long does not need to put on a U.S. men's jersey ever again. I'm sorry, Aaron. You've been mediocre to decent for us for 7 years now. But I'm done. I don't care to see him anymore. He doesn't, and this isn't even like because he made a mistake, because I was also mostly on Kellen Acosta. But I nothing about him says, yeah, he's a guy who can actually make this team better or good,
Yeah,
to that, not even better, just like function properly.
yeah. I mean, I would have rather seen Miazga, get
Right.
those minutes. Like, what I mean, he's, again. I'm not saying he's a leap in improvement, but he's what, 3 years younger or whatever it
And
is.
there's not a center back in MLS other than like Miles Robinson, who is going to be a elite, like a step up from Aaron Long or Matt Miazga. Like, let's be real honest, but like, I'd rather see Matt Miazga.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I think you got to give those opportunities, and we've seen Long. I mean, we know what it is. Again, he's around. I mean, he's there, and if you need him, I think you call him in, and he can probably do a serviceable job. But at this point, you know what he's going to provide. You know what he's there, and he's, and it's the same old, same old. So there's no real surprises that come from him, and again, with it, I go back to like what players weren't released for this camp, right? I mean, so I think that's another thing that we
Fair,
want to
yeah.
make sure we talk, because I think there were certain players. I mean, this is a very short camp. It was like 2 or 3 days, a match, and that's it. And so, we saw a couple injuries that took some players off. That in Paul McCall got called in to replace essentially, one of them or two of them, how you want to look at that. And so you look at other players that weren't called in, and you have to wonder why, because they had been called in, they look good. It's just that the club just didn't release them for the short duration on that. And I think that may be part of it. I had yet to receive an answer, and I probably won't on, on who was denied to being released, because they don't have to release for these camps and not FIFA windows. So that's that's something to look at there. But I still think overall you had some good looking talent in there, with Morris and a few others there. It's and I like the point of bringing in young players, even if they just don't see the camp, participate in the camp, and don't play. I think I want to see a little bit more of that. I think going forward, I think that just that exposure to the camps are important for some of these younger players. We won't see too much of it, because there's a couple of we've got the U20s and the Olympics coming up, and U17s
Right.
for that matter coming up. So I don't think we'll see a lot of that in the next couple of years, but there'll be opportunities where you can pull some of these guys, a player or two, in to a camp, just to kind of give them that exposure. I think it helps when they're finally ready to earn their first cap.
And look, this is also the first one. You have an interim manager. You didn't have a sporting director. You don't have a general manager for the U.S. men's national team program. So, the credit to JT Batson and Cindy Parlow-Cohen of putting this thing together. But after that, they're not in charge of setting the direction of what this team is supposed to look like. But now we have a guy to do that. So let's put a bow on that Continental Classico talk, because it was a meaningless friendly. It was 1-1, whatever. We stayed up way too late to watch us play Mexico. I'll do it again next week if you tell me to. We now have a sporting director. Let's talk about that, because Matt Crocker, officially hired by U.S. Soccer. He was introduced this morning, Tuesday, April 25th. To kind of peel back the curtain, listeners, Thomas and I had a kind of a frustrated moment at the end of recording last week, where we kind of came off and we were just like, can we just hire someone? Because not that we don't think this spot is important, and this is kind of framing how we're going to talk about this, not because we don't think that this hire is important or this position is important, but because it's not going to functionally affect the senior men's or women's national team team outside of who he hires as a coach, which is not really going to affect anything until a year from now, right? He's not making a U.S. women's national team coaching hire anytime soon, at least not until after August. The men's hire hopefully should happen soon, but even then, what does that mean for the next half a year? So we were just kind of frustrated that this wasn't happening. And, we kind of heard rumors, obviously, about Gooch a couple weeks ago. Oguchi Onyewu, that is. But hey, kind of out of the darkness, U.S. Soccer let loose that they had a guy that they were going to hire. It's Matt Crocker. He comes to us from Southampton. He is Welsh by birth. He has been a part of the English, both club and federational setup for quite some time. But now he's a new U.S. sporting director. Thomas, your just initial thoughts when you saw this name and kind of, dug into what he actually has done in the world of soccer.
Yeah, I mean, the name was not anything I recognized. When I started looking into it, and looking at his resume, I'm saying, it's a good hire. He's got international experience with England. He's got club experience. So to me, it's a pretty balanced resume. On the surface, he's under him, under England, they won a U17 and U20 World Cup. I think that's significant. But again, I think there's just a lot of unknowns here. I think for me, the big one's going to be this: is how much are they going to let Crocker have kind of free reign. U.S. soccer has traditionally wanted to be, have a committee approach to things. I think I think you have to give someone, the full ability to take it and run with it. I think, I don't know what the, what the duration of this job is for someone, but I think you have to, you have to give it, at least, I don't know. You've got to definitely get a cycle to let things go through. But I think it'd be even more than that, because it takes a while to kind of build that culture, to build that program a little bit from something that's already there a little bit. You kind of have to work with what's there. But so I'm excited because it's not someone I recognize, but I'm also hesitant because I just don't know, and how much that U.S. is going to be patient with, what that takes, because it doesn't happen overnight. And so they haven't been traditionally, patient with, those.
But we've also only had one real sporting director ever, and that's kind of where I think that this position is still evolving into what it means for U.S. soccer. And that's why I'm personally just glad they hired someone, number one. Two, I'm glad they hired someone who has both club and country experience, right? As you pointed out, under his direction, England won multiple youth World Cups. That is a positive. That is a direct, tangible result. Does that mean that the U.S. will start winning youth World Cups? I don't think that's a correlation you can make or an expectation you can set. But it does, to me, just at least excite me that he comes from not just a club in Southampton that is known for youth development and definitely playing in a very consistent style, but also, part of this kind of revolution through the English FA and their youth programs to prioritize not necessarily styles of play, but basic concepts and goals for player development. And that, to me, is what I like. Is it seems to be a coach, an academy director by nature. So for him, it's about player development and progression. And then you get to the senior levels, and it's just about making sure that those things come through and that a manager is trying to get a team out there that, in his words, is fearless, right? I think that was kind of what stuck out to me, was that he didn't really go into a true identity or style necessarily, but he did talk about characteristics of the team, right? Fearless. He did talk about being able to manage the game with the ball, but also being able to respond and be kind of adaptable within the game. He definitely mentioned technical ability as a key building block. Obviously, he is sporting director, and I want to, again, emphasize this. He is not going to make that happen, right? He can set up, again, kind of benchmarks and educational plans, but at the end of the day, he's not doing that. He's not out there training the kids. I just like that it seems like he is looking at this from a bottom-up approach rather than just, well, we got to get Jose Mourinho in here and all of a sudden we'll be good at soccer.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach that needs to take place, because it's got to be built in a way that is consistent, and has a built culture from youth teams all the way up to the national team. because I think that's where it's lacking a little bit. We saw, like, for as successful as Tab Ramos was in that kind of that role for
Yeah.
the for a while, there was a kind of a disconnect between what Tab was doing and what the national team was doing.
Oh, there's
And so,
absolutely a disconnect between what Tab wanted to do and then what eventually Berhalter was, doing. Like that was not at all the same.
yeah, and I think that's kind of telling to just the fact that they're not on the same page. And so look, we know this player pool is going to determine your style of play while it should for the most part determine your style of play, because you can only work with the players you have available.
Correct.
And so you kind of have to work around that a little bit. But in doing that, you're not going to just say, well, we're doing just this and that only. You're gonna you're gonna try different things. You're gonna have different options, and so that's where that's gonna kind of come in along the way. So it's going to be interesting. And so, and I'll throw this name out there, and a lot of people aren't going to know who this is. And he was, in my opinion, I think he was really the first full-time manager and kind of the sporting director hasn't existed until recently, but Phil Woodsnam, back in the, national team coach in 1968, first full-time coach, given the full reigns for the U.S. soccer, was from born from Wales, came in and really at that time transformed the program, added things in there that didn't exist. They never had camps, they never had pieces in place along the way. So like that mindset, when I saw that, I'm like, he came to mind. And I know it's again 1968, but that's really when U.S. soccer started, and soccer in America kind of started its growth right after the '66 World Cup. Everything was huge, and it built from there. But again, what I was concerned about and happened with him was, is U.S. soccer going to let, Matt Crocker do what he needs to do and be patient with that, because it's going to take some time.
Yeah.
I don't know how long you give them what the pieces are, because it's kind of all new, and it doesn't really exist anywhere else. In the international soccer, it's kind of something they've invented in some manner.
Yeah. Well, and to your point as well, I think Cindy Parlow-Cone and JT Batson have done a good job of staying out of actual sporting conversations, outside of like when decisions need to be made. But we haven't really gotten to that point ever, right? Where like a coach needed to be fired or whatever. And like, again, as much as people complain about Vlatko and Danovsky, like I'm sure Cindy was part of that, but like Vlatko is a no-doubt choice in WSL that time. So, she hasn't had to be a part of that. JT definitely hasn't had to be, other than like, we can't have Berhalter stay on because of like legal reasons. And it seems very clear that they're not in a rush to bring Berhalter back. Let's just put it that way. So I'm curious with you as well to see like how much of a rope does he get to have to play with, but it does seem to me like they are more worried about the overall development of the federation, and the sporting side, direct involvement in the sporting side is not their main focus, which is nice. But let's talk also a little bit about what this means because the next question, obviously, well, what does this mean for the U.S. men's national team? Again, the U.S. women, they're not doing anything until at least after August, right? Look, let's be honest. I don't think Vlatko should continue. That'll obviously be a decision that Matt Crocker will need to make at that time. But it's pretty obvious, if you win the World Cup, Vlatko might stay. If you don't, he's gone. Like, if you don't win the World Cup, Vlatko is probably gone. It's a fair result. Sorry. So let's talk about the U.S. men and how this affects the timeline, because Anthony Hudson is still our interim manager. I don't think it would be fair to expect a coach to be hired and brought in to coach the finals of the Nation League. I'll expand on that in a little bit, but it is very likely, obviously, that Hudson is going to be the coach through the summer. But do you now expect something to happen quicker? Do you expect something to be in place quicker? How does this alter that timeline of a coaching hire for the U.S. men's national team for you? Because they are a little bit ahead of schedule for hiring Matt Crocker.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised in the time when it first came out that and so it was earlier than I was expecting. I was expecting probably close to June. I would think, just based on
They
how
initially
slow
said by the Women's World Cup.
right.
So
Yeah,
I'm
I was
with you. Like this was early for me.
yeah, because I mean, again, worst case, my hope is like you bring someone in, they're there for a month before the Women's World Cup. You kind of
Right.
they go, they participate or whatever. And again, based on when he's actually going to be starting, I guess it's kind of a little later than that. But I think he's going to have that opportunity to evaluate that. I don't think it changes though. I for as much as I would want a manager, for the Gold Cup, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I part of me says don't rush with the manager, but also part of me says I've seen almost a dozen qualified managers come off the market, since the end of December. That again, I don't know if you could afford them, all those other logistics, or if you even want them, but you're going to see more come off because if they don't hire someone till after August, how many other managers are you going to miss out on? And so
Well,
I think that's the real,
yeah.
critical piece of it.
I think to me that's the biggest thing is I don't expect a new manager to coach the US national team in the Gold Cup. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, because I
I
think if
think
you're
we should have a coach at least secured by then, though. That's the difference.
yeah, and whether it's official out there secured,
Yeah.
I think is where some of the logistics come into play, and I think that's okay. But you can't and the timing of the Gold Cup is critical because it's pretty much at the end of this. It's at the end of the season.
Yeah.
You could have your full European squad if you chose to in there. The timing of it works pretty well in that respect. So, you want to make sure that you have that in place because clubs work quickly to make those decisions.
Yeah,
For those
the
hires.
clubs are going to be working quickly. I agree. Like if there's a manager sacked at the end of the season, in any country, which is the end of May, is when they all end. A lot of those clubs are going to pick someone up by the end of June, if not before then. Because they have their short list. So I'm hoping Crocker is. I don't know, but I would assume that part of the interview process would have been talking about the type of manager, or if not, your short list of managers you would hire.
You would have to think. I mean, I would think you would have to, say, yeah, who's on your list of possible candidate, realistic candidates. I mean, you can throw out the big names all day long, but when you're in that mindset, I think you have to be able to provide those options. And I wonder a little bit if that I guess got him the job or didn't, depending on who he said.
Yeah.
Because I don't, and I can't confirm one way or another, and you may know, but there's a thought that Jesse Marsh was a manager that Southampton was going to hire, and that Matt Crocker was involved. But I'm seeing mixed. I'm seeing mixed.
I mean, I'm sure he
that.
was involved in the sense that he was the director of football operations, so he's probably part of the search committee, if you will, right? But it doesn't seem like he was actually involved with like the actual decision to hire or not. I don't think it's a far stretch to say that it makes Jesse Marsh's appointment to the U.S. men's national team a greater likelihood. I don't think that it's a significantly greater likelihood.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's hard. I don't know, and I'm not sure it would matter either way.
I also don't think Jesse's that interested in the U.S. men's national team at this point in time. I think that's another thing that people just discount as he might not be super interested in.
He's very wishy-washy on the club level too, and I don't really know. I mean, I wouldn't love it, but I wouldn't hate it either. To me it would be, type of thing. I'd live with it. I can't say I'd support it necessarily, but and so
right.
we'll see. We'll see what he comes up with. I'm really hoping that U.S. Soccer does a better job of. I mean, I know they want to, they want to keep things close to the vest. I mean, who are the other candidates for the sporting director? I would love to know. I mean, this isn't a bad choice. It's kind of an to be determined situation, but I think I don't know. There's some confidentiality thing they've had with the managers. The fact that they leak more big name managers that deny they ever got interviewed
Right.
for the national team, and then you interview two managers officially the last time around. To me, it doesn't seem like you're really putting a full effort into that. So my hope is, like, why not? Like, why not put that out there? I mean,
well, and I think as well. Again, look, the Premier League final match day is May 28th, right? You're going to have a bunch of people fired that Monday. Do you want those people? Or is it you can now, do you want a guy who is fired from their club? Or do you look at the available options of like, okay, well, he didn't do as well maybe as he wanted. He's still employed and we'll go get him. Your options are greater at the start of June than they are right now. So I think you and I would agree that like waiting until June is not the worst idea because you're just going to have more better options than you do right now. Because anyone who's lost their job during the season probably isn't, a person high on your list. And that includes Jesse Marsh, by the way. So I'm hopeful that this timeline, again, I'm not looking at the timeline to hire a U.S. men's national team coach before June. I think that would be stupid. Because again, like I said, you're missing out on the opportunity to hire better players. Or coaches, I should say. But I would like to have an announcement maybe during the Gold Cup, honestly.
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's not hard. That gives you a month. And again, it would be unfair for your new hire that you hire, say, the Nations League is June 15th. If your search can truly start because the pool opens up on June 1, let's just go with that. They're not coaching the Nations League. That makes no sense. No, maybe you get them hired in time for the Gold Cup. I don't even think that happens.
Yeah, I think Hudson's earned that though at this point. You know what I mean? I don't think there's any point in rushing that piece of it unless you absolutely have a drop dead candidate that's there. But and again, maybe you have better insight on this. Like, we're talking a lot about candidates that aren't with clubs, but I don't know what the process is of getting a candidate that's currently with a club. I mean, so your best chance obviously is going to be not now, but June 1st. So at that point you can say, hey, look, this is your opportunity. Club season's over.
Let's just put it this way: it's a lot easier to talk to a guy who's not employed than a guy who is.
Right.
And even if it's because you're not looking to hire him immediately, the club still has to allow that discussion to happen, basically.
Right, and more likely to happen when the season's over than mid-season in general.
Right.
So
I mean, especially if you're talking about a guy who's either fighting for promotion or relegation, like he's got more important things to worry about. So in his club. So I think this shifts the timeline that I expect it to be done by the end of June. But I think people who expect the coach to be coaching in either of the tournaments this summer are asking too much.
Yeah, I mean, I would love it if that coach is available for the Gold Cup. I mean, that's a dream, I think. It'd be nice, but
I mean, let's be honest. Any coach who's decent should be able to manage the U.S. men to a Gold Cup semifinal at least, right? Should get them to the final unless your name is Jurgen Klinsmann. Like that's it. I'm sorry, it's not that hard. So yeah, he could probably jump in immediately, and that might be a nice long exposure to like how he is as a manager and how his style of play is. But I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, and I think the timing on that would works too. Bring him for the September window, and you kind of start there. Yeah. And I think that September October windows. I think it was rumored Germany was a match.
Germany was a rumor, yeah.
Yeah, and that's still pretty solid, I think, because they were going to play U.S. and Mexico in the United States. So, so that would kind of be a good opportunity for the new manager. So, I mean, that's an option. Those aren't.
I don't mean this flippantly. I really don't, because obviously the matches this summer matter, but the Nations League doesn't substantively matter. This Nations League doesn't. We've accomplished what we need to accomplish through this round of the Nations League, which is to qualify for the quarterfinals of the next round that happen in November of this year, right? The Gold Cup doesn't really, and that matters because the quarterfinalists, those who win the quarterfinals, automatically qualify for the Gold Cup or the Copa America in 2024. So like this Nations League final isn't going to get us any more closer to a Copa America. You know what I'm saying? The Gold Cup also doesn't functionally matter in terms of like this result means this, other than the trophy, which is important. Do not get me wrong. So if your next matches that actually mean anything aren't until November, right? So if the rush is to get them in for June, for the June tournaments, which I mean, they are important. They're continental championships. Don't get me wrong, but like, would you rather sacrifice getting what you feel like could be the best manager possible, or getting the best guy who's available now? I'd rather just wait for the best manager possible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, but I don't want to discount the tournaments, though. Look,
no, I'm not trying to. I'm just saying.
No, I know you're not. Yeah, I know you're not.
Yeah,
but I do want to say, like, and this, Crocker said it today. He wants he's got a culture piece in mind. Culture starts with winning.
Absolutely.
You win,
yeah.
You win. You're doing that. So I think that continue winning. We saw it last cycle, Nations League, Gold Cup. Beat Mexico 3 times. Those things are kind of critical to that culture piece of it. Again, I don't know how many other nations have as many dual national opportunities as the United States does, but that's critical too. Like the player pool is not that deep, so we have to, and we really have to make sure we're identifying domestically players in the MLS, USL that can meet the pool, and also internationally that are the dual nationals, to make sure that we can have this 45, 50 player pool available to us along the way, because it's not depth. The consistency is never there. We have to have that, because if we want to see that culture of winning, we need to continue, all those areas involved. So, but going back to your point, I mean, you want the best possible manager. I don't want to rush it to get someone there for the Gold Cup. I want to make sure it's, you have your dream candidate as best as possible, in place.
Yeah.
Without rushing it. And because, we haven't mentioned it, but Crocker doesn't officially start the position until August 2nd.
Right.
But he is going to be in capacity of doing stuff along the way. So, but I mean, I would imagine, I don't know what he's going to be. I don't know if he's going to be going to Australia for the World Cup and those sorts of things.
I mean, if I were him, I would have somehow gotten hired before then so I could get a free trip to Australia and New Zealand. That's just me as someone who had to pay a bunch of money to go. But you bring up a good point. His official first day is August 2nd. But he does have allowance from Southampton to do 2 specific things. One, help the U.S. women's national team get ready for that World Cup, which is obviously the most important thing that functionally is happening for this federation this year, is the Women's World Cup. But he also has the allowance to start digging into the hiring of the next U.S. men's national team manager. We didn't get any real clarity on if a general manager for the men's team would be hired, A, at all, or B, before that coach comes. It does sound like Crocker, Batson, and Cindy Parlow-Cone are perfectly well equipped to handle that search in their own right as a triumvirate, as well as with the Sportsology group. But again, I think you and I can kind of set the standard that the search for the the next U.S. men's national team coach started today. That doesn't mean it's actually going to amount to anything until later, but it has officially started today. He's allowed to start working on this particular project.
I mean, Crocker's got his list. I mean, he's got his list.
He has to.
I mean, he had it.
He had a list at Southampton. I know he wasn't hiring and firing managers, but he had to have been part of that conversation.
Right. I mean, you pick your list, then you start looking at it and along the way. And so, and the thing about the candidate is I actually think Crocker is more capable of what he can do to maybe not need a GM if the right manager is hired. I think you have to have that combination of that piece of it. So, and I do get a little nervous of that because of the Klinsmann Klinsmann effect with it being the technical director, because
Absolutely,
he won, didn't really, he just wanted the title and the money, and he didn't really do anything, in the role. So you got to be careful with that too. So you got to be, it all depends on, the actual skill set of the manager, and whether they're capable of being able to support that role in the way it needs to be.
And that is something that I definitely took from this press conference today, is that it seems like he's very happy with letting Kate Markgraf still run the women's program. He does. I do want to make it clear, like he worked with both men's and women's national teams when he was with, or youth national teams when he was with England, and we've seen the growth of the English women's national team and literally the past 4 years, from 2019 till now. They've grown significantly. Maybe that's because Phil Neville is no longer managing them, but that's not by happenstance. Let's just put it that way, right? Like, that took quality youth development, especially for the England women's national team, which didn't have that fully in place before. So it's not that he is not concerned about the women's national team program. It's just that it's very clear that, like, Kate Markgraf is doing her job and has her processes and systems in place. He's there to support her. We just don't know if that will happen on the men's national team side. I still think I'm of the mindset, and this kind of happened when this news broke. I was chatting with some friends, like, why not just hire Gooch as the U.S. men's national team GM, right? That's where you can get the former player who, kind of can just be a little bit more of a vibes guy, if you will. He can help with recruiting dual nationals. He can help with, assisting both the national team manager and really all the national team managers with, whatever they need help with on that side. He doesn't have to be, he now doesn't have to be as coach mindset as we probably would have thought he would have needed to be. So that's kind of my thought about the men's national team manager or GM.
I thought about that combination of technical director, GM, and manager. Like they want a little bit of, former, player
right
in there. I mean, I think that's something they're trying to do a little bit more. I'm okay.
And I don't think we're getting a former player with our next senior national team manager.
Yeah, I would be shocked. And if it was, they'd be going way back, maybe.
Yeah, because Jesse Marsh barely qualifies as a former men's national team player.
Yeah.
Jim Curtin does not.
No, I'm thinking, again, Peter Vermees is the one that, to me,
the only one really.
Right, he's the only one that that. And that's going.
I mean, Greg Vanny. Do we want to take him from LA? Like, I don't know about that. Landon Donovan.
I kind of. I have candidates, but my stuff's broken out differently. I'm really more tactical about my candidates as opposed to like emotional about it. Like, I don't really. I'll be honest with you. I don't know. When you look at the tactics of a manager, people are like, "Oh, he does this." I'm like, "Yeah, I have no idea what he does." Like,
and that's not going to translate to the national team level,
right? Nor should it, because if we learned anything from what we saw from Greg and other international managers, is the player pool has to determine that piece of it. Greg was very hard and fast about how he wanted to run the system, and he got slapped around, admittedly, along the way, that it wasn't going to work. Like, he tried it didn't work. And
he had to change it, and he did.
Right, and he changed it, and I'll give him credit for changing it. But maybe he lost some stuff along the way, in there, while you're fiddling around and playing. I don't know who it was now. It's some terrible right backs and left backs that we don't.
Right.
It's so unmemorable. I can't think of their names. I can just see them.
But I'm happy with. I mean, I think if you have a sporting director and a senior national team manager who are. If the sporting director's job is to kind of hire and set the tone for all of the youth national teams, then I don't think, if that's what he's doing, then I don't think he needs a GM necessarily. But I could also just see the GM being the guy who helps make all those operations work for the senior national team in the major, tournaments for the youth national teams. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I would agree with that. I don't think it's going to be needed necessarily, and they've kind of said that in both
Which was the
programs
point
are
of the Sportsology kind of review of the organization, was to look for if this made sense.
right. And I have to wonder if the handwriting was on the wall anyway, because McBride sounded like he was already on the way out before
Yeah,
before the World Cup anyway. Like, what was he really doing in capacity to what Ernie Stewart was doing? Like,
right.
just hiring the coaches. Like, I mean, he just wasn't. He didn't seem to be fully involved in there. So it's an extra person on the payroll doing doing what?
Right.
Like, I mean, I don't know how much work goes into being an international anything, but we know we don't play day in day out, so it can't be, you're probably scouting
Right.
your team, talking to players, but like it's different. You only play matches, maybe every month, best case. So yeah, because I mean, the one thing that impressed me about Matt, Crocker is that he did it for the men's and women's, and I think the women's program has been so successful. But if we've seen anything, is that everyone is starting to catch up.
Yes.
On that piece of it.
We
And I
need
think that's
yes.
Yeah, I think Matt is hopefully going to make sure that we keep that advantage along the way, because you can't just rest on your laurels for that program, because you won 4 World Cups, you won 4 Olympics. That's awesome, but we see England's one of them, but you see these other teams,
England, Germany, France now a little bit revitalized. Those are teams that it wouldn't surprise me if they beat the U.S. in the final. Luckily, we don't have to really get through them to get to the final. But I think, because I think, to your point, the U.S. women, one thing that a lot of people really invested in the women's game in this country have always said is that the youth development from the national team level isn't truly there. And even at the ground level, the grassroots level, it's not set up to create World Cup champions the way it used to be, right? Because as you mentioned, our 4 World Cups, I mean, 91 and 99, though those women were fantastically talented, it was a lot of like, well, it was us and the Scandinavian countries who were allowing women to play soccer, and I don't mean that jokingly, like that was kind of how it was. We were able to develop a group of very talented women, but from 2003, that I think 99 and 2003 tournaments that then got us to 2 World Cup finals in a row. One we won, one we lost in 2011. But development then is so different now, because back then you still weren't competing with the likes of the Women's Super League, Division 1 Feminine, Liga F, like all these, the Frauen Bundesliga, like all these legitimate, well-established structures in Europe that had, I mean, you had some in Sweden, you had some in Germany, they were legitimate leagues, but now all those countries in Europe are putting out very legitimate women's, not just national teams, but professional leagues. So because they have the infrastructure from the men's side that they can kind of copy and paste to the women's side, the U.S. is going to fall behind if they don't find a way to revitalize how they're identifying talent, setting goals for player development, and overall just doing a better job, because the U.S. women's national teams have not done well at the youth level the past half decade, maybe decade as a whole. They haven't been very good results-wise. That is concerning. I always say that, like, youth national team, youth tournaments don't really matter, but they kind of do. I mean, they don't not matter. The results don't ultimately matter, but when you're the U.S. women and not making it out of the group, that's a problem. So if he can just help implement some best practice, of course, I was on a rant and now it goes out. I think if he can take the best practices from what he learned and what he implemented by being both men's and women's director of youth development in England, and pass those on to Kate Marcraft to help her implement and reignite women's youth development in this country. That will help build the next generation of great U.S. women's soccer players.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's critical. I mean, I'm just looking right now, and at the past, U17, U20 from and you hit the nail on the head. They just have not been successful at that level. I mean, players have come out, of the programs, and I think the one thing the women's national team has showed us is that they do have a great core and great depth, in that, and so they can, you can bring in some youth players, and they can just be brought into the system and then incorporated very well, but you can't rely on that forever. And so I think that's I think that's going to be critical to that program in in that growth and development of maintaining that, and finding that success. I mean, look, the women's program is growing. I mean, it's there's 32 teams in the World Cup now, where 2 decades ago there was 16. I mean, so it's growing. The competition's being is much better. So I think I think Matt Crocker's he's got a lot on his plate to do it, and I think he's capable, because that's the thing. He did that. We said it before, I said it again, he did that with the England Federation for 6.5 years.
I think my positives of this, and this is my just general take on Matt Crocker as a signing and as a hire in general, right? Is it underwhelming? Yeah, because this person is a name that we didn't know before. The likelihood we would have got a whelming or overwhelming hire is unlikely, because even Oguchi Onyewu, that was the only name that kind of leaked during this process, wouldn't have been a slam dunk hire. I would have been fine with him, because again, I don't think that he would have done anything that like negatively would have hurt us necessarily. But like, it's underwhelming because you hadn't heard of him. That's it, right? When you look at his resume and you look at where the stops he's had along the way, I don't know who else you could have found that would have had as good of a resume, who was also interested in the job. And again, we have to caveat the fact that this is not something that everyone in the world is going after. But I also think it speaks positively of U.S. soccer that Cohn and Batson were able to go out and hire a guy who, I get at Southampton right now is not performing well, but he had done good things at Southampton at both stints, and he had done really good things with the England FA. That speaks well for U.S. soccer that they were able to hire a guy like that. But I don't think we know if this is a success or not, or if it's a great hire or not, because the time will tell. I just think that there are a lot of people who are happy that he's not a U.S. soccer guy, which I do think is a positive. I think that's a plus that he's not coming from U.S. soccer. But I also think it's a positive that his initial coaching jobs were at youth clubs in the United States. He mentioned Little Rock and Kansas City. So he's not out of touch with what the U.S. soccer landscape looks like, because the U.S. soccer landscape is different. I don't think the culture is there, like Charlie Davies was talking about. And Charlie was very upset that we hired this guy, when I think he was just mad that Gooch didn't get hired. But I think understanding a little bit of the landscape is probably good for this job, as opposed to just coming in blind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact he's not part of the Old Boys Network that we're aware of, I mean, who knows? There's ties there, but I think is a major plus. Look, there's certain things you'll learn along the way, and there's certain things you'll bring into it, and that's the thing. We can't be closed-minded to someone else coming in with new views and new ideas. We have to, as fans, as a federation, we have to look at that. We have to be patient with that. We have to, because there are bumps along the way. In doing that. And again, we're not going to see direct impact from this hire. Certainly not this, half cycle for the youth teams. I mean, that's kind of already there and predetermined. Like, It's going to be the next 3 or 4 half cycles for those youth programs to see what they're putting in play to do that. And so we have to be patient as fans. Federation has to be patient. They've had some successes, but it's getting over that hump, right? It's getting over that youth hump, making it to the round of 8 when you need to get to the round semifinals level. Like that's the next piece of it. And same with the national team. They've got to make that leap. Enough with this round of 16. Like that should just be there, right? You've got to get further consistently, because that's the culture, that's the growth, all these things along the way. That has to be the standard, and you have to set that organizationally through your youth as well, so they have a high level of standard and getting that exposure to those tournaments at a high level. And for them, it's gonna help the whole piece. And then that's the other thing, like the attention. We need some attention on this national team,
right?
Both men's and women's. I mean, women's get a lot of attention, a lot more nationally than the men's does. But we need that attention going into this World Cup positively.
Yes.
So we have to kind of erase what happened at the end of last year and move forward and get that positive attention, because if we can't, it's going to be we want people behind us. We want people to be excited about this team, this organization, this federation, going to that. And I'm excited because Mike Crocker is, I'm sorry, I did not tweet. Matt Crocker. I don't know why. Matt Crocker, I think, to be determined, but I'm really hoping he's a diamond in the rough.
Yeah.
For U.S. soccer, and he wows us, because it's our turn. It's our turn. Like we've got to get something right, and I'm hoping this is the start of something good.
Well, that brings me to the one listener question I want to talk about on this episode, because it is very pointed toward this piece of news that we've been talking about. It comes from USA Striker on Twitter, also known as David. He asks, what is your ideal outcome from the hiring of Matt Crocker? And assuming we see those positive results from the men's, women's, and youth national teams, how long should he be employed? Is this one or multiple cycles? So basically, what does success look like? And if he is successful, how long should he stay?
Well, I mean, he was with I don't know what circumstances he left the federation in England, but he was there almost 6.5 years. So that, depending on the timing of that, it probably put him. He probably had several youth World Cups, and for what we know, they in 17, the U17 and U20 England men's team won those World Cups, and I think they won. Didn't they win something in 2019 UEFA?
I think they won the UEFA U21. Yeah.
Yeah, UEFA European U19.
Oh, yeah, UEFA. Yeah. Sorry, I'm reading his bio right now.
Yeah, U19. So
just do that.
I mean, I think at this point, I think you got to do 2 cycles. I mean, I think you got to do 2 cycles. Unless something catastrophically horrible happens where you're just like, we can't continue this way. I mean, this one doesn't even count for the youth, right? It just doesn't count for him. They're not his. It's not his program. So
I think they count in the sense that you need to see positive developments in the on-field performance. Let's just put it that way, right?
Right, but I don't think he's not gonna. I mean, fairly or unfairly, he might get credit for successes, and if he gets credit for successes, he'll I guess he'll, in that same light, he'll get
knowing U.S. soccer Twitter, he'll get more blame for failures than he will get credit for successes. So
yeah, it's a great question, because I mean, I didn't know how long Stuart was going to be in the role, right?
Yeah.
And I think you got to get. I think there's got to be patience federation wise. So from that perspective, but I think he's going to want to have an opportunity to have a couple World Cups from a youth level under his belt.
Yeah.
So
well, look, I think success from the hiring of Matt Crocker is, it does come down to the youth national team level, but it doesn't come down to did you win. It comes down to, are we seeing a better performance as a team and better performance from individuals. And that can come from better talent identification. It can come from better exchanging of ideas from U15 up to U23 and even the senior national team coach. I think that's what we're looking for in terms of success. But it's hard to put like a quantifiable success on a sporting director hire when you're talking about an international team, right? Like with a club team, he would likely be in charge, a sporting director if he were being hired by an MLS club. Let's just put it that way. You could blame him if you don't win MLS Cup in 5 years. You can't blame him if the U.S. doesn't make a quarterfinal. And I mean, sure, you can be like, well, you hired the wrong manager, but like, there's so many intangible things that can happen outside of I hired the right manager. Because you could go out and hire, I mean, jokingly, I say Jose Mourinho, but the guy that everyone wants to hire is Jose Mourinho. And it could happen that you don't make the semifinals in 2026, like Berhalter laid out. Because soccer is a weird sport, and you could have an injury that you can't just go out and buy another Christian Pulisic. You can't go out and buy a striker. You can't go like we just had Malpew hurt. You can't go out and buy another Malpew. You can hope that Lynn Williams or Alyssa Thompson or Trinity Rodman or even Midge Purse can replace her, but you just don't buy a new one. So I think it's hard to put success metrics from on-field stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that you do want to see you want to see a transition though. You want to be able to see players,
absolutely
from the youth to the national team. Like even if you had success and they didn't do that, like that's a problem, right? Like, because you have to be able to have a transition from your youth programs to national team, because you can't have a missed generation again, right? And I think that's part of the reason why they've set this up, because they don't want to have another missed generation of talent. That means you missed a World Cup. Like we can't afford that as a federation to do that, because it cost them, 20 million, at least. So,
and I think that's a point that I would like to make, is to see, I think success could look like more consistent integration of U20 national team players into the senior team. Again, I think we all got spoiled with this particular cycle, talking about younger players featuring for the national team. I don't think we're going to ever see something like that ever again in this country. But, can we see a handful of the U20s go to the senior national team and actually become stalwarts by 2025, right? Because we have holes that we need to fill on the senior national team. We at least need depth pieces, if not like actual starters. So I think that would be one, is like, can we get a handful of these guys from this or the next U20 World Cup making impacts on the senior national team? I think another tangible metric I would say is we're qualifying for the Olympics every time. I think that is absolutely something that as the U.S., the fact that we haven't was utter complete joke of a failure. And we even didn't do it under Stewart once. So to me, that is something that we need to be doing, because we should have better talent, more resources, and better preparation than any other federation could put forth outside of maybe Mexico. So I do think that those are some things that I'm looking at, but that qualifying for the Olympics and winning the Olympics, that we're not there yet. And that's not a Matt Crocker thing.
No, but the Olympics is an interesting one, and I have, I want us there every time, but England really hasn't been to the Olympics. I think I say it
because it's CONCACAF. That's where I'm at. It's because
right,
CONCACAF.
Right, because you're talking right. You should be the top. The U.S. should be there every time,
right?
No matter how it is. I just don't think how it's been organized.
And that's the thing that Matt Crocker can do. That's kind of what I'm looking at. Is it's not. We have the resources and the talent pool. He needs to be leading that charge to, if it's getting players released from their clubs, or if it's having that backup plan of okay, this is column A, but this is column B. Those are, I don't know how that looks necessarily, but I'm hoping that is something that he can actually tangibly impact. Of we are now in better positions to compete at these huge national team levels, because talent identification is better. talent prioritization is better, and talent securing is better. Those are the three things that I think he can actually affect. But, from there, it's hopefully that translates to the men's national team. But he's not going to have an effect on whether or not the men's or women's national teams win. You know what I'm saying? That's not on him.
Yeah, he's giving you the ingredients that he's got to make sure he's got the right, right people in place to be able to put it all together. Right. And that's, that's the critical piece of it. So,
but I do think if you're successful, and again, success is a little squishy, but this is not a one cycle or two. Like I don't have I want him around for only one cycle. Like I tend to say that for national team managers. It should be there until he is either A, unsuccessful, B, gets fired for something, or C, moves on. I mean, this is if it's working, why would we change it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean the problem is that again, I go back to a federation. Their input, their vision.
Yeah.
When at some point that comes into play, right? They'll get tired of it, and so they, when they gave Klinsman the reins, I always go back to it because to me that changed it, and he screwed things up, and they're like, we're never going to hire another international, it's American only, and so you've got to find the fine line between that.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be interesting. I almost, you got me thinking almost on the Goosh piece of it. I almost want him to be hired as the GM so that they'll not hire an American manager just to hire an American manager, right? Like I want them to hire the best candidate,
absolutely,
to get the most out of this group. That's what you got to do. I tweeted earlier, if anyone did that better than anyone, it was Bora in the 94 cycle. He got every ounce of everything he could out of that 94 team. I mean, there's no way they beat Brazil. There's just no way. Like, I mean, that was a 1-0 game, and they were in that game. If Lawless didn't screw up on that goal, but they're in the game, and you have to. That's what you have to be striving for, especially when it's on home soil. You have to do that.
I mean, look, if we don't make the semifinals, it's not like the end of the world. But like, if you're not making the round of 16 or quarterfinals, then like everyone top to bottom in the men's national team program should be gone. Same with the women's program. I mean, look, I don't think we're winning the World Cup this summer, but if you're not making the final, there are bigger things that are problematic. So, there are levels to this. Not everything is an exact science, but I think overall this Matt Crocker hire makes me feel confident about the direction that the overall federation is heading.
Yeah, I would agree.
Any last thoughts about this or U.S. soccer as a whole right now?
Yeah, I'm just excited we can start looking towards managers for the national team and start speculating on that and seeing what crazy names comes out along the way. Someone did message me and said that Crocker has ties to, I'm not going to say this last name, Ralph
Ragnick. No, Hasenhüttl. Yeah, he was at Southampton for a while.
Yeah, and Steve Cooper. I don't know who either one of those are, but I wanted to name drop them as as
possible candidates.
Yeah,
sure.
Why not? I mean, you the thing is with the one thing about when you're hiring someone, you're going to hire someone that you're comfortable with and hire someone that's you're familiar with.
Yeah.
So I think that that's you're going to see that. I think those are reasonable names to kind of consider because of their relationships in the past. So
Steve Cooper is the coach, the manager of Nottingham Forest. Who looks like he has always been bludgeoned in a boxing match somehow all the time. And then Ralph Hasenhüttl is the guy who was at Southampton and kind of established a Red Bulls-esque style of play there. So I think that's, again, why people are kind of assuming a Jesse Marsch type of hire. But I don't think that Matt Crocker as a whole thinks that is the style of play to pursue. He never, obviously, I don't expect him to say those things quite like this, but he was very hesitant to identify an exact style of play in the press conference. So, but to your point, those are guys that he has ties to. Those are names now to consider. So
add them to your list if you want.
Yeah. All right. Well, Thomas, thanks for joining me to talk about the big news. I mean, like you said, we are now able to look forward to hiring a U.S. men's national team manager. And that should bring, if anything, that should be the positive of today, is that we have taken a step forward. And for me, that's good enough. So thanks for being here. Thanks for talking with me about all this. You can follow him on Twitter @USKeeper. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm Bart. I'm out.